One morning around 7 a.m., a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at a nearby house. An officer soon arrived, and after knocking several times with no response, he tried the door and found it unlocked. As he cautiously inspected each room, he made his way upstairs. What he found in the first bedroom sent chills down his spine. Inside, he found a body that appeared to be that of a teenage girl. Realizing he had discovered a crime scene, he immediately called for backup. More bodies were soon uncovered, and the investigation began to unravel the dark events that had taken place and why anyone would harm such a lovely family. This is the horrifying case of the Harris family. In today's video, we take a look at a case that took place in the town of Dryden in New York during the holiday season that involved Warren Harris and his family. For 39-year-old Warren Harris, also known as Tony, his 41-year-old wife Dolores, also known as Dodie, and their children, 15-year-old Shelby and 11-year-old Marc, Christmas had always been a cherished time, and the 1989 holiday season was no different. Dodie ran a gift shop in a renovated barn about 50 yards from their main home, while Tony held an executive position at an electronics distribution center. Their expansive house in the town of Dryden was fully decorated in anticipation of the upcoming festivities, and they went out of their way to make sure that family, friends, and visitors felt welcome. On Friday, December 22nd, Dodie spent most of the day alone. Around 4 p.m., the kids came home from school. The Finger Lakes region of New York was blanketed in snow, with more expected. As usual, the children relaxed in front of the TV while Dodie prepared dinner. Tony was expected home by about 5:30, and the afternoon was passing by swiftly. It was during this brief 90-minute window, when the three of them were alone in the house, that a killer made their move. While the exact trigger for the ensuing nightmare remains unknown, it is suspected that the ordeal began when someone knocked on the door seeking assistance. Those who knew Dodie well agreed that she would have readily allowed a stranger into the house to use the phone. It is believed that Tony arrived just as the terrifying events were unfolding. Overwhelmed and caught off guard by the horrifying events that were happening, he was unable to protect his loved ones. What is known is that by the end of the night, the sole survivor of the Harris family was a kitten named Shadow. Around 7 a.m. the following day, a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at the Harris home. By 7:30, an officer arrived at 1886 Ellis Hollow Road. After several unanswered knocks, the officer tried the door and found it unlocked. Upon entering, he smelled a faint hint of smoke, similar to what one might expect from a kitchen accident. It was only when he saw a gas can in the living room that he suspected the fire might have been intentionally started. As he moved through the seemingly deserted house, he observed that the power was out and the phone lines were cut. The oppressive silence throughout the rooms created an unsettling atmosphere, suggesting that if anyone else was present, they were no longer alive. After carefully ascending the stairs, he peered into the first bedroom and made a harrowing discovery. Inside the scorched room lay the body of what appeared to be a teenage girl. Realizing he had encountered a crime scene, he promptly called for backup. While awaiting reinforcements, the officer surveyed the room, taking care not to disturb the evidence. It was clear from the girl's condition that she had been shot in the head, and her partial nudity suggested she had been sexually assaulted. Although she was not restrained, she was blindfolded. Next to her on the floor was the body of a dog, deceased, but without visible signs of trauma. When the officer moved to a nearby bedroom, he found 3 more victims, 2 adults and a child. All had been hogtied and shot execution style with pillowcases over their heads. Despite signs of burning, the damage to the bodies was minimal. By the end of the morning, the victims were confirmed to be Tony, Dodie, Shelby, and Marc Harris. As detectives searched the property for evidence, they noted that the family's van was missing from the garage. Later that day, the vehicle was discovered abandoned in a local mall parking lot, likely by the perpetrator or perpetrators. The medical examiner determined that Shelby had been tortured and sexually assaulted before being killed. It was estimated that the family's suffering had lasted from around 6 to 10 p.m. Investigators found that gasoline had been poured upstairs and set ablaze to destroy evidence, but the fire had mostly extinguished itself, preserving much of the crime scene. Curiously, it appeared that the murder sites had been thoroughly cleaned afterward, leading detectives to suspect that the perpetrator or perpetrators might have had professional janitorial experience. During interviews with the neighbors,
One recalled seeing a black male on a bicycle riding up and down the street just before dark the previous evening. Since it got dark around 5 p.m., this would place the cyclist near the Harris home while Dodie and her children were preparing for dinner. Given that the only tire tracks in the freshly fallen snow were from the family's van, it seemed probable that the killer arrived by a different mode of transportation. Earlier that evening, a woman driving home with her young child had noticed a man matching the description struggling on his bike along the snowy highway. Although she had considered offering him a ride, she decided against it due to her fussy toddler. Unbeknownst to her at the time, her decision likely spared her life. When the news of the murders spread, investigators also discovered that the family's credit cards had been used to buy hundreds of dollars worth of clothing, jewelry, and electronics at the mall where the van was found. After interviewing the clerks who processed the transactions, a composite sketch of the suspects was created. Once these images were shared with the public, tips identified the suspects as 54-year-old Shirley King and her 33-year-old son, Michael, who also went by the name Anthony Turner. Investigations revealed that Shirley worked part-time as a house cleaner and at the reservation desk of a well-known bed and breakfast. Her son, who had worked intermittently as a janitor, had a criminal record showing a preference for robbery over conventional employment. As the investigation progressed, another neighbor came forward, reporting that he had seen a black male with an older female driving the Harris's van past his house at 6:50 a.m. After seeing the sketches of Michael and Shirley King, he confirmed they were the individuals he had observed. Since this sighting occurred just minutes before the police were alerted about the smoke alarm, it was considered a significant lead. Unfortunately for the investigators, the witness later retracted his statement, admitting he hadn't seen the two clearly enough to make a reliable identification. On February 7, 1990, police went to the apartment where Michael King was living with his girlfriend and their 2-year-old child. When he did not respond to their knock, they forced entry. Inside, they found King sitting with a shotgun. He fired a shot before being gunned down by the officers. A ballistics expert later confirmed that King's weapon was the same one used to kill the Harris family. While some doubted the details of the confrontation, King's history with law enforcement provided insight into his mindset. It was reported that after one of his many encounters with police, he had allegedly expressed a desire to be shot by them rather than face a long prison sentence, suggesting he had chosen suicide by cop. With the main suspect out of the way, detectives shifted their focus to his mother, Shirley. Although both had been spotted at the mall using the Harris's credit cards, it was Shirley who had forged Dodie's name on the receipts. When confronted with this incriminating evidence, she admitted to using the cards and knowing their source but denied any involvement in the murders. Nonetheless, her knowledge of the killings for 6 weeks led to speculation about her deeper involvement. After considering their options, authorities charged her with burglary, arson, possession of stolen property, and forgery. While investigators believed Shirley had been present at the crime scene at some point, they were not fully convinced of her role in the actual murders. If she was involved, it seemed more likely that she was an accessory after the fact rather than a direct participant in the violence. During the trial, a gas can found at the Harris home on the morning the bodies were discovered was presented as evidence. An officer testified that fingerprints on the can matched those of Shirley King. With undeniable proof of her presence at the crime scene, the jury quickly convicted her on all charges. Shirley was sentenced to 17 to 44 years in prison and was formally handed over to the state, closing the case. However, 2.5 years later, an internal investigation revealed that the law enforcement officer had planted the fingerprint evidence to strengthen the case against Shirley King. Following this explosive revelation, Shirley King's conviction was overturned and she was released from custody. In the subsequent months, all charges against her were dropped and her previous convictions were annulled. In 2007, Shirley King filed a lawsuit against the state of New York for $500 million. Ultimately, she received around $286,000 in compensatory damages. Although she had indeed been wronged, some in the community resented the large settlement. They argued that she had benefited from her son's crimes without showing any remorse for the victims, questioning her entitlement to such a significant payout. Despite this, the decision remained, and she left with the money. Years went by, and Shirley King passed away in 2015 at the age of 80, taking any remaining secrets with her to the grave. Although the complete details of what the Harris family experienced during their final hours will never be fully known, it was unquestionably a night of unrelenting terror. After examining the evidence, it is clear that their suffering at the hands of a stranger they had welcomed into their home out of kindness is truly horrifying. The thought that Tony, Dodie, and Marc were forced to hear Shelby being assaulted in the next room only intensifies the heart-wrenching nature of their ordeal. Demonstrating that animals can sometimes show more compassion than people, the family dog, Annie, chose to remain by Shelby's side rather than seeking safety as flames engulfed the home's second floor. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Annie stayed close to the teenager she had loved and known, choosing to offer comfort rather than escape. Unfortunately, after staying by her side all night, she eventually succumbed to smoke inhalation. It is both tragic and heart-wrenching what the victims of this story endured at the hands of these monsters, despite the kindness extended to them by their hosts. As we reflect on this sorrowful tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were cruelly taken and the loved ones who mourn their loss. The Eastburn family, a military household, resided in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Gary Eastburn was a captain in the U.S. Air Force. He met Catherine in the 1970s. Their young love blossomed into a lifelong commitment. For the Kansas girl, it seemed like love at first sight. After dating for 5 years, they married. They had 3 beautiful daughters, Cara, Erin, and Jana. Katie was a stay-at-home mom as they moved frequently due to Gary's military career. In 1983, they were stationed at Pope Air Force Base, where Gary served as the air traffic control chief. In May 1985, Gary was training at a squadron's officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, while his family stayed in Fayetteville. Life was as routine as it gets for a military family until they planned a move to England for Gary's job. Unfortunately, their hoped-for peace was shattered by a man in a horrific way. In addition to the Eastburn family, this story also involves a man named Timothy Bailey Hennis. Timothy Hennis, a Minnesota native, was navigating life at his own pace. Publicly, he appeared as an average man, a blonde-haired but easily noticeable due to his towering height of over 6 feet. He grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from Mayo High School in 1976. Hennis worked in Rochester until he enlisted in the United States Army in 1980, marking a significant change in his life. He went on to marry Angela, who gave birth to their daughter Christina in 1985. Around the same time, Hennis was employed as a parachute rigger at Fort Bragg. The paths of the Eastburns and Timothy crossed on Tuesday, May 7, 1985, when he responded to an ad Catherine placed in the local paper to rehome their family dog. Due to their upcoming move to London, they couldn't bring the dog and were hopeful to find her a loving new home. Coincidentally, Hennis's family was seeking a dog, as their current one did not get along with their newborn. That Tuesday, Catherine invited Timothy over, and after some conversation, he took the dog to see if she would adapt to his family. By this time, Gary had been at the military base for a few weeks. Over the years, they had developed a habit of calling each other every Saturday morning since Gary spent most of his time on base. However, on Saturday, May 11th, Catherine didn't answer Gary's calls. Sensing something was wrong, Gary contacted the Fayetteville Police Department. Officers responded and visited the Eastburn home, but no one answered the door, and the house lights were off. Before leaving, they left a note for Catherine to contact her husband. On Sunday, May the 12th, the Eastburns' neighbors, Sergeant Bob Seafelt and his wife, noticed newspapers piling up outside. Reflecting on the past few days, they realized Catherine's car hadn't been moved. Bob decided to investigate, and although no one answered his knocking or the doorbell, he thought he heard a baby crying inside. So he went home and called the Eastburns' babysitter, who arrived quickly. She looked through the window and saw Jana lying in her crib with her arms outstretched. She tried to enter the house to get the baby, but Bob convinced her to wait for the police. The first officer to arrive opened a window in the baby's room and handed Jana to Bob. He asked the neighbor to wait outside while he searched the house, as there was a strong odor he needed to investigate. Inside, the officer found the lifeless bodies of Catherine and Erin and called for backup. Further inspection revealed Cara's remains as well. While the police secured the scene, Jana was cared for at the Seafelt home. The girl was sobbing and covered in feces. Doctors who treated her determined she was severely dehydrated and warned that her condition was critical. Without immediate help, she faced imminent death. Catherine, age 31, was discovered without pants or underwear, wearing a torn blouse and bra, with multiple stab wounds and signs of assault. 3-year-old Erin was found in her parents' bedroom, also bearing stab wounds and blunt force injuries to her chest and back. 5-year-old Cara was located in her bed, appearing to hide under a blanket with various chest injuries. All 3 victims had their throats cut. Police established that 2-year-old Jana had been alone in her crib for 3 days until neighbors found her. When asked later about that night, survivor Jana told a child psychologist she hid because bad men were coming, possibly instructed by her sisters to remain hidden, which might have saved her from harm. Investigators also determined the perpetrator spared Jana's life as he didn't think there was a risk that she would recognize him. Forensic experts collected samples from both the crime scene and the victims' bodies. Evidence included hair strands, fingerprints, blood traces, and seminal fluid, with the latter found during Catherine's examination. Despite the severity of injuries, little blood was found at the scene, yet a luminol test indicated blood had been wiped on walls and in the bathroom. Detective Jack Watts personally contacted Gary to inform him about the tragic events involving his family. When the phone rang in Gary's bedroom, he hoped to hear Catherine's voice, but upon learning it was a detective, he braced for devastating news. The officer instructed Gary to return immediately without disclosing details over the phone. That evening, Gary boarded a plane back to Fayetteville, unsure of what awaited him. Upon arrival, he faced the heartbreaking reality that his wife and 2 daughters had been murdered. However, he found solace in knowing Jana had survived. Gary cooperated fully with detectives despite his deep depression. Initially a suspect, his alibi of being in Alabama weeks prior to the crime quickly cleared him of suspicion. Gary's account highlighted 2 key details that piqued investigators' interest: the advertisement seeking a new home for their dog and Catherine's visit from a stranger on the 7th. According to Gary, Catherine had mentioned in a letter that a compassionate man had taken their dog in hopes of integrating it into his family. After obtaining Gary's statement, investigators escorted him home to ascertain any missing items. Gary reported that Catherine's bank card and a piece of paper containing her password were absent. Additionally, an envelope containing around $300 was nowhere to be found. The Eastburns babysitter also informed the police that Catherine had expressed concerns about being stalked. The family had endured harassing phone calls for months, with the caller occasionally making explicit references to Catherine. A few days before the tragedy, the babysitter answered a call from a woman named Angela who was interested in seeing the dog. The babysitter recorded Angela's details for Catherine to return the call. However, the note containing Angela's information was not discovered during the house search. During the investigation into the perpetrator's identity, 20-year-old Patrick Cohn approached investigators with potentially valuable information. Patrick recounted seeing a man leaving the Eastburn residence on the evening of Friday, May 10th, the day authorities believed the tragedy occurred. Patrick recalled that around 3:30 a.m. that Friday, while driving home, he observed a white Chevrolet Chevette parked in the driveway and witnessed a man exiting the house. Patrick provided a detailed description of the man, noting he was white, tall, with blonde hair, a broad nose, and a mustache. He mentioned the man wore a black jacket and jeans and was carrying a trash bag at the time. Investigators requested the young man's assistance in creating a composite sketch of the suspect. Subsequently, authorities disseminated the sketch and description of the individual. Additionally, a plea was issued for the man who had responded to Catherine's dog ad to come forward to the police. This appeal had the intended consequence. Timothy Hennis was at home with his wife watching the news when he saw the advertisement. He was stunned to realize that he was the person who had responded to the ad and bore a striking resemblance to the sketch. Without hesitation, Timothy immediately left his residence with his wife and daughter, driving his white Chevrolet to the police station, where he volunteered to assist in any way possible. Timothy cooperated with investigators for several hours without legal representation. When describing his interaction with Catherine on the 7th, he recounted parking his car at his residence around 9 p.m. and walking up the driveway with a leash in hand. According to his account, he knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman who invited him inside. Timothy continued, stating that Catherine informed him she had just put her 3 young daughters to bed and proceeded to introduce him to the dog. He mentioned liking the dog, but expressed interest in seeing how she would interact with his Spitz. Consequently, he agreed to take the dog home to his wife and daughter and assured Catherine they would stay in touch. Investigators established that the crimes occurred between Thursday evening and early Friday morning. It was on the 10th that newspapers began accumulating on the porch of the residence. Additionally, neighbors had spotted Catherine earlier on the 9th. Based on this evidence, law enforcement questioned Timothy about his activities that evening. He stated that he had driven his wife and daughter to a relative's house and then returned home. Authorities requested Timothy to provide samples of hair, blood, and seminal fluid, but forensic analysis did not link him to the crime. Simultaneously, police prepared a lineup for Patrick, who had identified Timothy from a photograph taken during a previous arrest due to bounced checks. When presented with 6 images, Patrick promptly identified Timothy. Timothy was released after several hours of questioning, and he drove back home. Police knew they had found their main suspect, and from that point on, they focused their investigation squarely on him, initiating interviews with his neighbors. Residents reported seeing him spending 5 hours near his home, burning items in a barrel, which drew attention as it was an unusual activity for him. Additionally, the dry cleaners confirmed that he had brought in his jacket for cleaning the day after the crime occurred. Another significant detail came from the landlord of Timothy's residence, who mentioned that Timothy promptly settled a $350 rent debt shortly after the incident. After the interrogations, Timothy and Angela believed their interactions with the police were over, but they were mistaken. Detectives arrived at their residence with an arrest warrant, charging the sergeant with sexual assault and first-degree murder of Catherine and her 2 daughters. In the course of the investigation, a woman came forward as a witness, providing crucial information linking the defendant to the use of the victim's debit card. Investigators determined that the stolen card was used at 10:54 p.m. on May 10th and 8:56 a.m. on May 11th. According to the witness, she had used the ATM shortly before seeing a tall blonde man in camouflage pants drive away in a light-colored vehicle. The timing described by the witness aligned with the recorded banking transactions. Detectives connected the $300 cash withdrawal to the previously mentioned overdue rent payment. Timothy retained a prestigious legal team, represented by Gerald Beaver and Billy Richardson, renowned as top attorneys in North Carolina. Prosecutors proposed a plea bargain to Timothy's defense, offering 2 counts of second-degree murder with a probable sentence of 2 consecutive life terms. He rejected the offer, maintaining his innocence and refusing to plead guilty. The defense strategy aimed to undermine the credibility of a key prosecution witness. They replicated the moment Patrick identified a man as Timothy by revisiting the Eastburn house under similar lighting and weather conditions. However, the witness did not spot the suspect during the reenactment. An unexpected development arose during the site inspection when a neighbor approached them, revealing he had observed a van parked outside the family's residence on the night of the crime. He recalled seeing a white man with short hair, accompanied by companions. A subsequent reenactment with Patrick suggested he might have misidentified the suspect. The defense attorneys then focused on discrediting a prosecution witness, the woman who had initially claimed to have seen the suspect at the ATM. During cross-examination, she recanted her statement, asserting that she had not witnessed anyone there that day. Timothy's first trial commenced in 1986, approximately a year after the triple homicides. The prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence, lacking any physical proof linking the sergeant to the murders. One theory proposed was that Timothy's advances towards Catherine were rebuffed, leading to a sexual assault followed by his decision to eliminate her and her daughters to prevent identification. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the events at the Eastburn residence as sheer madness, describing it as one of the most tragic incidents in the nation's history up to that time. His argument was accompanied by a presentation of numerous disturbing crime scene photographs. Patrick served as the key prosecution witness before the jury, positively identifying the defendant as the man he had observed leaving the Eastburn home in the early hours of May 10, 1985. On July 4, 1986, following 10 hours of deliberation, a jury convicted Timothy on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree sexual assault. Just 4 days later, on July 8th, he received a death sentence and was transferred to death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. However, this marked only the conclusion of the initial chapter in a protracted legal saga, as Timothy's defense remained steadfast in their quest to establish his innocence. By 1988, his legal team appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court, citing investigation inconsistencies, false testimony, evidence suppression, and improper use of graphic materials that had swayed the jury's verdict. Consequently, the justices ruled in Timothy's favor, overturning the previous trial and initiating a new one that commenced in April 1989. During this retrial, the defense concentrated on discrediting Patrick's testimony, arguing its inaccuracies from the first trial. New witnesses emerged in Timothy's support, including a newspaper delivery woman who testified that at 1:45 a.m. on the day of the incident, she had spotted a long-haired man driving a light-colored van near the Eastburns residence. In a similar vein, the defense presented another witness, a tall teenager with blonde hair named John Raupour, who testified that he frequently walked near the Eastburn residence late at night when he couldn't sleep. He admitted passing by around 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985, mentioning he often wore a cap and had a black jacket resembling the one described by the witness. This testimony allowed the defense to argue that Patrick might have mistaken John for the suspect that critical day, planting reasonable doubt about Timothy's culpability in the minds of the jury. The defense also highlighted that shoe prints discovered outside the Eastburn house were 3 sizes smaller than those of the defendant. Additionally, it was noted that a blood sample from a towel did not match Timothy's blood profile. Further bolstering their case was an anonymous letter processed by the post office on the same day as the trial. The letter expressed remorse to Timothy and confessed to the crimes committed. The trial spanned 3 weeks, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously acquitted Timothy of all charges. Timothy left the courtroom as a free man. He later re-enlisted in the military and in 1998 relocated with his wife and children to Fort Lewis, Washington. After the initial trial, Gary moved on with his life and focused on caring for Jana. Despite scrapping plans to relocate to London following the death of his wife and 2 children, he concluded in 1988 that a change of surroundings was necessary and decided to relocate to England. While there, he was informed of the need to return to the United States for a retrial. Once the trial concluded, he returned to England where he met and married an Air Force nurse. In 1998, Gary returned to the US, settling in a town 20 kilometers from Fort Lewis. In 2005, the unresolved Eastburn family murder case was discussed at a seminar on advanced criminal intelligence techniques for detectives. It was there that Larry Trotter, a homicide detective from Cumberland County, learned about seminal fluid samples collected during the initial investigation, which had previously not yielded any matches. Aware of advancements in DNA analysis, Larry arranged for further testing of these samples stored by the sheriff's office. A year later, the results from the State Bureau of Investigation lab were returned. With the test results came the long-awaited revelation. The DNA profile matched that of Timothy Bailey Hennis. Adding to the clarity, the forensic scientist affirmed that the sample was 1 billion times more likely to belong to Timothy than to any other resident of North Carolina. Larry Trotter promptly shared this breakthrough with the district attorney, who then contacted Gary Eastburn. Confident that they had the right suspect and now armed with concrete evidence, the DA transferred the case to Fort Bragg's legal team, who presented it to the base commander general. In response, the commander ordered Timothy to be activated for duty to face 3 charges of murder and a court-martial. On September 26, 2006, accompanied by a military lawyer, a Fort Bragg CID officer, and 2 police officers, Timothy was formally served a letter directing him to report to base within 30 days. Despite the pending charges, he reported for duty and began working part-time in an office role, receiving regular pay and benefits. In August 2007, the commander of the 16th Airborne Corps ordered Timothy Hennis to stand trial in a court-martial on 3 counts of premeditated murder. By December 2007, Hennis filed an appeal arguing that the Army lacked jurisdiction, but his petition was denied in April 2008. In May 2008, Hennis further appealed the court-martial decision to the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, only to have it dismissed the following month. Continuing his efforts in September 2008, Hennis appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, which also dismissed his appeal. Undeterred, Hennis pursued another appeal in December 2009 at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, but once again it was rejected in March 2010. Timothy's court-martial commenced on March 17, 2010, marking 21 years since his previous acquittal. Colonel Patrick Parrish presided over the proceedings, where prosecutors emphasized the new DNA evidence as the pivotal difference from previous trials. The prosecution presented crime scene photographs and a series of family photos provided by Gary, depicting his smiling wife and daughters. Following a 3-week trial, Timothy Hennis was convicted of premeditated murder on April 15, 2010, and sentenced to death. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and confined to Fort Leavenworth's disciplinary barracks in Kansas. He remains the only individual to undergo 3 trials from not guilty to guilty verdicts. Presidential approval is required for military executions, a rarity since the 1960s, making his actual execution unlikely. In February 2020, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces denied his appeal. Gary Eastburn commented on the sentence, expressing doubt about Timothy's imminent execution, citing the last Army execution in 1961. In a 2010 interview with the Seattle Times, Gary remarked, "I'm perfectly content if he spends the rest of his life in prison. But if they do execute him, it's no more than he deserves." It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims faced against this monster. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. Garbage collectors who were making their rounds early one morning found a home ablaze and immediately called in the fire brigade, who rushed to the scene. While extinguishing the fire, they observed movement in the upper bedroom window. Someone was trying to grab their attention and clearly needed help. Medical personnel were summoned to the location, and the individual, in a state of shock and unable to communicate, was rescued. Subsequently, the individual was transported to the hospital, where they later slipped into a coma. Meanwhile, bodies were recovered from the premises, and authorities determined that the victims had been murdered rather than perishing in the fire. This unsettling revelation prompted widespread speculation. Who could have perpetrated such a heinous crime against this innocent and beloved family? This is the shocking case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born in Lons-le-Saunier, France on February 11, 1954, and raised in Clairvaux-les-Lacs in Jura. He attended Lons-le-Saunier's high school until he completed his baccalaureate. In 1971, he started classes at Lycée du Parc in Lyon, but left after 1 term. Later, he joined medical school. He would later marry a woman named Florence Crowley. Florence Crowley was born on March 6, 1956. She studied at the University of Lyon to become a doctor. It is there that she met Jean-Claude Roman. Jean-Claude, who was a distant cousin of the family, initially didn't catch Florence's interest. They also barely knew each other and didn't spend a lot of time together. However, over time, through their mutual friends and study sessions, they started spending more time together. Jean-Claude Roman was immediately smitten with Florence and made persistent efforts to win her over. She, on the other hand, saw him as an ordinary guy, not particularly attractive to her or well-spoken. Florence had envisioned marrying a typical doctor, intelligent, attractive, and charming. Following a failed second-year exam, she switched from medicine to pharmacy. Together with Romand and Luc L'Admiral, who passed their exams, they maintained a routine for the next decade, studying, taking exams, and supporting each other until graduation. In 1980, Florence and Jean-Claude Roman tied the knot, and 6 years later, they had their first child, Caroline. 2 years after Caroline's birth, their son Antoine arrived. Florence lived the life of a conventional wife and mother, working at local pharmacies to support her family, while her husband worked at the World Health Organization in Geneva, a short distance from their home in France. Florence was out and about in Ferney, France, a few days post-Christmas in 1992. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, while Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a typical day, reminiscing about their recent Christmas festivities. While out, she bumped into the school president, who had something on his mind since before the holidays. Politely exchanging holiday greetings, they chatted about their Christmas experiences. The conversation gradually shifted to an intriguing incident involving Florence's husband. The president mentioned the headmaster's demotion due to an affair with a teacher, prompting a school board meeting. Florence remembered the incident but was uncertain where the president was leading with the conversation. He mentioned his intention to discuss the matter with Jean-Claude, as he also served on the school board. The president's secretary attempted to find Jean-Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, given his employment there, but strangely, his name was not listed. Florence found this amusing as she laughed it off, but at the same time, she was intrigued. She assured the president that there must be a valid explanation for the absence of his name and number, promising to address it with her husband upon his return from work. After exchanging farewells, they never spoke again. Jean-Claude Romand kept his work life quite private, sharing minimal details with both family and friends. Florence held the belief that her husband engaged in significant research and commanded respect in the medical field. He maintained a clear boundary between his professional and personal life, to the extent that Florence never had access to his office phone number, as Romand had insisted on wanting to remain undisturbed during work hours. If Florence ever required urgent communication with him, she had to page him, and he would promptly return her call at his earliest convenience. Friends often inquired about Jean-Claude's role at the WHO in conversations with Florence. They would ask, "What exactly does Jean-Claude do at the WHO?" Florence would attempt to deflect the question with a chuckle, confessing that she too was uncertain. Occasionally, she would playfully speculate that one day she might discover her husband was a secret spy. It was during the Christmas season of 1992 that Florence learned of an annual Christmas tree event organized by the WHO. This gathering allowed staff members to bring their families to the office to decorate a large Christmas tree together. Surprisingly, her husband had never mentioned this event to her. Florence felt unsettled by the situation. From the school president's revelation about her husband's absence in the WHO directory to the discovery of the unmentioned family event at his workplace after over a decade of service, these incidents likely lingered in Florence's thoughts. The extent to which these revelations troubled Florence internally remains uncertain, as it is unclear whether she confronted her husband about them. As recounted by Florence's brother, who joined the family for the holiday season, a profound sadness seemed to shadow Florence during those days. The conversations that transpired within the household during this period are left to speculation. The days rolled by, ushering in the new year of 1993. A couple of days into the year, Florence and Jean-Claude Romand found themselves shopping together. Insisting that Romand purchase a new suit, Florence eventually persuaded him. Later that same day, after parting ways with his wife, Romand made a visit to a pharmacy, placing an order set to be ready by January 9th. On the evening of January 5th, Romand made withdrawals from 2 different ATMs, totaling 2,000 francs. He generously gave 500 francs to a homeless individual he encountered before proceeding to a gun store. Exiting the store, he carried tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Returning home, the night passed uneventfully, and time passes until a frantic call to the fire brigade was placed on January 11th at 4 a.m., reporting a fire engulfing the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the blazing house and promptly alerted the fire brigade, who rushed to the location. While extinguishing the fire, the responders noticed movement in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating someone was inside, seeking help. Medical personnel were summoned, and the person who was Jean-Claude Romand was rescued from the residence. Upon extraction, he appeared in a state of shock, unresponsive as paramedics attended to him. Subsequently, Jean-Claude was transported to the hospital, where he eventually lapsed into a coma. Within a short span, the fire was extinguished, enabling the first responders to enter the premises. Their family friend Dr. Luc Ladmiral was summoned to the scene, witnessing with dread as stretchers carried out the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence. Whenever a household fire results in fatalities, the police launch an inquiry to uncover the circumstances surrounding the incident. This process aims to offer closure to the bereaved families and eliminate the possibility of any criminal activity. Therefore, following the tragic fire at the Romand residence, law enforcement authorities initiated an investigation, given the magnitude of the loss of an entire family of a prominent doctor. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team made a disconcerting observation: evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull. This revelation sparked suspicion and intrigue, particularly after determining that Florence's demise resulted from blunt force trauma rather than the fire itself. During the examination of the children, another distressing revelation emerged. Contrary to initial assumptions, both Caroline and Antoine did not perish in the fire. Instead, they met their demise from gunshot wounds hours prior to the inferno. This stark reality indicated that the events unfolded before the household was consumed by flames. Subsequently, law enforcement commenced an inquiry into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, with Jean-Claude Roman incapacitated in a coma, rendering him unable to provide any information, investigators faced the daunting task of pursuing alternative leads. Transforming the Roman residence into a crime scene, authorities reached out to relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors in a bid to unravel the mysteries surrounding the family. Luc L'Admiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being removed from the scene, was contacted as part of the investigation. Uncertain about the unfolding events, he struggled to comprehend the situation. When questioned by investigators about potential enemies of the family, Luc couldn't identify any. Nevertheless, he was summoned for an interview. Several days later, Luc found himself facing police officers who probed into the family's relationships and recent events that could have triggered the fire. Despite thorough questioning, the consensus remained unchanged. The family enjoyed a positive reputation, and no significant incidents preceded the tragedy. Subsequently, the focus shifted to Jean-Claude Roman, revealing a shocking revelation. Roman had never been employed by the World Health Organization, nor had he delivered any lectures at the University of Dijon. In fact, he was not a qualified doctor at all, let alone being employed. Initially skeptical, Luc's disbelief grew as he recollected their shared academic journey, which slowly led him to a startling realization. He recounted to the authorities an incident from their second year when he had noticed Jean-Claude Roman's absence during an exam. This departure from Roman's usual behavior had raised concerns for Luc. Upon visiting Roman at his residence, he observed his friend's ailing condition, who had clammy skin, pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude Roman disclosed that he was battling lymphoma, a form of cancer, albeit manageable, exacerbated by exam-related stress. At Roman's request, Luc pledged to keep this information confidential, especially from Florence. Investigators determined that Luc didn't have any additional pertinent details. Consequently, they awaited the forensic laboratory's findings on the charred residence, hoping to glean further insights for their inquiry. Investigators noted peculiarities within the residence. They discovered that all doors had been locked internally, indicating that no unauthorized individuals had entered the premises. Initially, an accidental fire was the primary hypothesis until the condition of the bodies was revealed. Subsequent findings hinted at a more sinister turn of events, prompting the urgent need to interview Jean-Claude. During Jean-Claude Roman's coma-induced weeks, law enforcement zeroed in on him as their prime suspect, initiating a thorough investigation. Although Roman lacked a medical degree, his extended tenure at the university raised suspicions. Upon contacting the educational institution, it was confirmed that Roman had pursued studies for 12 years. While he successfully completed his first-year exams, he failed to pass those in the second year. Exploiting the absence of enrollment restrictions, Roman continuously re-enrolled in the second year throughout his academic tenure. All those years of academic dedication, attending lectures, and studying medical books, yet Jean-Claude's failure to pass the second-year examination seemed perplexing. The possibility of oversleeping and missing the exam session lingered as a plausible explanation. A chance for redemption had presented itself with the opportunity to retake the exam months later, but he never showed up. As investigators delved into the deaths of Florence and the children, they were confronted with another grim discovery. Jean-Claude's uncle, seeking to relay the tragic news to his parents, arrived at their residence only to encounter an eerie silence. Upon entering, he discovered the lifeless bodies of his mother and father, both victims of gunshot wounds. A ballistic examination confirmed that Jean-Claude's parents had been fatally shot with the same firearm used on Antoine and Caroline.
Furthermore, the close proximity of their estimated time of death indicated a deliberate connection. The unfolding events only grew more mysterious. Following the public disclosure of the tragedies, the police received an anonymous call from a woman unwilling to disclose her identity or any personal information, expressing reluctance to involve herself in the investigation.
However, she did possess crucial information to share, revealing that she had engaged in a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude Roman after meeting him in Paris, and she too had been told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. Romand had misled her into believing he was a specialist with influential connections attributed to his purported role. The woman had been led to believe that Jean-Claude Romand was actively involved in and financing significant research projects. Moreover, he portrayed the banks in Geneva as highly advantageous. Leveraging his supposed position, Romand enticed her with the opportunity to invest funds in a Swiss bank offering an impressive 18% interest rate return. Through persuasive tactics, Romand managed to persuade his lover to make a financial investment. Initially hesitant, they reached an agreement wherein the woman would provide him with 90,000 francs for investment, with the expectation of receiving returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude Romand of their arrangement, emphasizing her need for the funds to sustain herself and her family. Following negotiations, they arranged to meet for a dinner gathering, with Romand extending an invitation to dine with a prominent political figure, sparking the woman's interest and eagerness to reclaim her investment. On the agreed day, Romand picks her up in Paris to embark on their anticipated journey. As night descended, Jean-Claude Romand and the woman found themselves still on the road, clearly lost. Suddenly, Romand pulled over and launched a surprise attack on the woman inside the car. He employed tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to incapacitate her. However, she fiercely fought for her life and managed to escape from the vehicle. Romand pursued her, but inexplicably halted when she pleaded for mercy. It seemed that he realized his plan had failed, and he begged for forgiveness. The excuse he provided to the woman was now familiar to the investigators. He claimed that his lymphoma was flaring up, causing him to behave erratically and unlike his usual self. In a state of survival mode, the woman agreed to remain silent about the incident in exchange for Jean-Claude safely returning her home. Investigators began to develop a grim perception of Jean-Claude Romand. He was a pathological liar, a manipulator, and a scam artist. But the question that lingered in detectives' minds now was he also a murderer? Upon awakening from his coma, Jean-Claude Romand was promptly approached by investigators eager to engage in conversation. With suspicions lingering, they sought a confession from him. However, Romand chose to remain silent. He sat in his hospital bed, gazing into the distance with a vacant expression, refraining from speaking. As inquiries swirled about the events of January 9th, the origins of the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, the severe injuries sustained by his wife, the discovery of his deceased parents, Jean-Claude faced a barrage of interrogative probes during multiple sessions. Despite the relentless questioning, he divulged nothing. It wasn't until the investigators told him that they knew the truth, that he was not a doctor and was unemployed, that a shift occurred. The tipping point that prompted him to finally break his silence remains unknown, but eventually he began to speak. On the night of January 9th, Jean-Claude and Florence were spending a typical evening at home. After putting the children to bed, they retired to their own bedroom. According to Jean-Claude Romand, his memories of that night abruptly ceased until the chilling recollection of discovering his wife sprawled on their bed, surrounded by a pool of blood, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Uncertain of what transpired, whether an argument had ensued or not, Jean-Claude Romand proceeded to sleep beside his wife and awoke the following morning to prepare breakfast for the children. Caroline and Antoine gathered on the couch to watch a cartoon selected by their father. He served them each a bowl of cereal before joining them to watch television. When the children inquired about their mother's absence, he informed them that she was unwell and needed extra rest. During that morning, Jean-Claude observed that Caroline felt warm, prompting concerns about her health. To prevent any potential illness from spreading, he instructed Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Somehow, Caroline ended up lying face down on the bed with a pillow over her head. Romand couldn't provide a clear explanation to investigators regarding this sequence of events, but speculated that it may have evolved from a game he played with his daughter. Subsequently, he retrieved his .22 caliber rifle, fitted with a silencer, and fatally shot his 7-year-old daughter in the back of her head. In a similar manner, Antoine met his tragic demise. His memories then became hazy. Subsequent evidence presented during the trial indicated that he left the house, purchased newspapers, and appeared to engage in routine activities, portraying a normal demeanor to any casual observer. Upon returning home, he watched television. Although Jean-Claude refuted these details during the trial, one fact remained certain. He received a phone call from his parents,
inviting him for lunch before noon on that fateful day. And he accepted the invitation. Departing from his eerily quiet residence, he drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. He then summoned his father upstairs under the guise of inspecting a purportedly malfunctioning boiler pipe. Despite his elderly father's physical limitations, he made an effort to examine the pipe at Jean-Claude's request, only to be callously shot in the back by his own son. Descending to where his mother was, he did not concoct any games or stories this time. His mother became the sole victim whom he shot while facing her. The motive behind this act remains a mystery. Before departing, he also shot the family's dog. When questioned about this during the trial, it was the only instance where he exhibited a semblance of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in sobs and tears, revealing that the dog had been cherished by his children, evoking memories of Caroline. It was at this moment that Jean-Claude Roman resolved to return home and take his own life. However, his plan did not unfold as intended. Recall the earlier mention of his mistress providing him with 90,000 francs for an alleged investment scheme? This was how Jean-Claude Roman sustained himself. He regaled numerous individuals, including his relatives and Florence's family, with tales of extravagant returns on investments, and due to their familiarity with Roman, they placed their full trust in him and they let him cook. Consequently, he amassed substantial sums of money from these trusting individuals over time. He would channel these funds into accounts under his own name in Geneva, thereby avoiding scrutiny from tax authorities, among others. Moreover, he meticulously managed the family's financial affairs, ensuring that Florence remained unaware of his deceitful activities. Of course, and eventually, the inevitable time to serve what he was cooking had arrived. As expected, the people began demanding the return of their money, along with the promised profits. Regrettably, this was an obligation he could never fulfill. Every single franc he acquired was swiftly spent on his immediate needs, leaving him with virtually nothing saved, despite amassing over 2 million francs across the years. The inevitable moment arrived when he would have to reveal the truth to Florence and all those who had entrusted him with their money. He found himself unable to sustain his web of lies any longer. The mounting pressure left him feeling trapped with no apparent escape. Like many other family annihilators, he convinced himself that by ending their lives, he would actually be sparing his family from the repercussions of his actions. Subsequently, he planned to take his own life, thus avoiding the harsh reality he faced. He believed he would be able to keep lying forever and had never anticipated being discovered or facing the need to confess. He would always just plan to fabricate another falsehood to sustain the charade throughout his life. On June 23, 1996, the trial commenced. He remained mostly silent, seated behind glass with a police officer on each side. He avoided making eye contact and kept his head down. By July 2nd, a verdict had been reached. Jean-Claude Roman was convicted of the murders of his wife, his children, and his parents. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 22 years. In 2019, he petitioned for release from prison to reside in a convent. During his incarceration, he had reportedly become a devout Christian. He had accepted his mistakes and would spend the rest of his life repenting as a form of punishment. The judge granted his plea, citing his good conduct as a contributing factor. It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims endured at the hands of this liar, manipulator, and monstrous individual. As we reflect on this horrific tale, our hearts and minds are with the individuals whose lives were abruptly ended and the grieving families and friends they left behind. In the serene setting of Middlesbrough, England, a picturesque town, the illusion of an ideal marriage masked a grim and malevolent truth. Enter the narrative of Jessica Patel and Mitesh Patel, a saga intertwining love, treachery, and a sorrowful crime that would plunge the community into a state of disbelief and shock. Jessica, a devoted pharmacist renowned for her compassion and work ethic, and Mitesh, her spouse, projected an image of contentment and stability in their shared life. However, beneath the veneer of marital bliss lurked undisclosed conflicts and a complex network of deception that would ultimately lead to a harrowing act of violence. Jessica Patel, the eldest child of Jai Patel, entered the world on 16th September 1983 in Leeds, a town nestled in the historic region of West Yorkshire. She was raised in a traditional Desi extended family of 12 members.
Despite their modest middle-class lifestyle, the family shared a deep bond of love. Divya Patel, her sister, fondly recalls Jessica as a lively and humorous individual. From a tender age, Jessica displayed nurturing qualities and harbored dreams of pursuing a career as a pharmacologist. Mitesh Patel, who was 3 years older than Jessica, shared the same pharmacology course with her at Montfort University. Their initial connection stemmed from encounters at community gatherings where their similar backgrounds and mutual understanding sparked a blossoming romance. Mitesh portrayed an ideal image of a partner, surprising Jessica with romantic gestures and adorable gifts. However, their relationship faced a hurdle when Jessica's mother received a devastating diagnosis of terminal cancer. Jessica understandably chose to be with her mother during her final moments, causing a strain on her relationship with Mitesh. Following the loss of Jessica's mother, Mitesh took on a supportive role, reigniting their bond. They nurtured their relationship and found themselves deeply in love with each other. Jessica expressed her desire to marry Mitesh, a sentiment he reciprocated wholeheartedly. Their mutual affection and shared dream of marriage encapsulated the essence of young love. After completing her pharmaceutical sciences degree at Montfort University, Jessica secured a place at the esteemed Manchester University for a master's program in pharmacology. Coincidentally, her boyfriend Mitesh was also studying at the same university in the final year of the same degree. They found themselves deeply in love, sharing the same city, university, career path, community, and religion, a seemingly perfect Desi match. However, when Mitesh sought Jessica's father's approval for their marriage, he faced a direct refusal. The family believed it was too early, but Jessica managed to convince them otherwise, emphasizing Mitesh and his family's strong Hindu beliefs that urged them not to delay. Despite initial objections, Jessica's father eventually relented under her persistent requests and reluctantly gave his consent. Their union culminated in a grand Indian wedding attended by 500 guests, leaving Jessica overjoyed. The extravagant ceremony took place in the garden of Jessica's family residence in Leeds, setting the stage for what seemed like a perfect beginning to their shared life. However, beneath the facade of marital bliss, Mitesh harbored a dark secret, leading a double life and engaging in covert encounters with men on Grindr unbeknownst to his new wife. The marriage served as a facade to conceal his authentic sexual orientation from his devout parents and the broader Hindu community. In less than a year, Jessica's family began to detect fissures within the relationship. She confided in her sisters about feeling neglected by Mitesh, highlighting how his once attentive demeanor waned shortly after their nuptials. Gayatri Patel, Jessica's cousin, recalled, "She mentioned that they had not had a sexual relationship for 10 months. That came as a shock, and at the same time, Mitesh became controlling." During her grandfather's palliative care in February 2010, Jessica, who shared a close bond with him, made infrequent visits while the family maintained a bedside vigil. Minal, her sister, recounted Jessica's distress, revealing, "Mitesh forbade her from staying with her grandfather. She expressed, 'Mitesh won't let me stay.' She said they got into an argument in the car over it, and he hit her." Jessica also divulged instances of him throttling her and maintaining an air of secrecy. Minal added, if he was on the phone when she walked into the room to go to bed, he would walk out and continue the conversation in one of their loft rooms upstairs, and that he wouldn't come back down to bed sometimes until 4 a.m. After being married for just 2 years, Mitesh embarked on a heated affair with Dr. Amit Patel, whom he had met through Grindr. Shockingly, Mitesh brazenly invited his lover to stay with them, passing him off as a mere friend. Despite this betrayal, Mitesh and Jessica eventually realized another shared aspiration a few years into their marriage, becoming pharmacy owners. Transitioning from Leeds to Linthorpe, a city located 66 miles away, they acquired the Roman Road Pharmacy on Roman Road. Through dedication and hard work, they transformed the pharmacy into a thriving establishment, not only achieving business success, but also establishing it as a cornerstone of the local community. Their journey to entrepreneurship also saw them purchase a residence in an upscale area of Linthorpe, becoming proud homeowners. Over time, both Mitesh and Jessica earned the admiration of the community, solidifying their positions as respected and beloved contributors to the quaint rural town of Linthorpe. In a bid to salvage their marriage, Jessica viewed the relocation as a new beginning, while Mitesh persisted in his relationship with Amit and maintained his presence on gay dating platforms. The couple faced mounting pressure to start a family, eventually leading Jessica to agree to attempt IVF after enduring 6 years of a sexless union. Unbeknownst to Jessica, Mitesh harbored chilling intentions of utilizing her embryos to establish a family with his lover. In a disturbing turn of events, Mitesh messaged Amit about Jessica's IVF procedure, inquiring, "Will you stand by me?" Amit's response was nonchalant, stating, "She might not even get pregnant. We will deal with it when it happens." Mitesh also insinuated that Jessica would no longer hinder their plans, hinting at her premature departure with the words, "If she went earlier than you think." In 2016, as Amit relocated to Australia, Mitesh's aspirations for a fresh life with his partner in the land down under began to take shape. Sending a text to his lover, he ominously wrote, "I'm telling you, her days are marked." The journey was an emotional roller coaster for Jessica, who endured the heartbreak and strain of 3 rounds of IVF within a span of 2 years. Recounting the arduous process, her sister Minal shared, "After each failed attempt, Jessica told me, 'I can't do this, it's too painful.' Her mental health suffered. It was quite a struggle. She suffered from anxiety and had regular panic attacks." On May 9, 2018, Jessica embarked on the 4th IVF cycle, which proved successful. The couple received the news of 3 fertilized embryos scheduled for implantation the ensuing month. Just 4 days post the positive revelation, Jessica visited her family, brimming with excitement. Minal recalled, "She was absolutely ecstatic. The chances of becoming a mother was finally on her, and her dreams were coming true." Tragically, a mere day later, her joy was abruptly extinguished. On the night of May 14, 2018, Jessica returned home around 7:10 p.m. after working late at the pharmacy. As she entered, Mitesh attacked her, forcing a Tesco bag over her head to suffocate her before strangling her and breaking the bones in her voice box. Jessica fought back, scratching his neck, but within 20 minutes, he had taken her life. Mitesh then bound her feet and hands with duct tape and ransacked the house to stage a robbery. Afterward, he drove to a local pizza restaurant and texted his wife's phone, pretending to be picking up an order. CCTV footage from the restaurant showed him chatting amiably with the staff while his wife lay dead in their living room. At 8:22 p.m., Mitesh called 911 from the couple's home and reported to the emergency operator that they believed their residence had been burgled and that his wife had been assaulted. He provided the address as number 35, the avenue in Middlesbrough, Linthorpe. When questioned about his wife's current location, Mitesh confirmed she was at the same address. He explained that upon returning home from being out, where he had gone to eat, visit colleagues at work, and retrieve his laptop, he found the house in disarray with his wife lying on the floor, unconscious and bound with duct tape. The conversation persisted as the operator endeavored to pacify Mitesh while extracting further details about the dire circumstances. Mitesh narrated the scene within the house, elaborating on Jessica's condition with duct tape restraining her and rendering her unconscious. Urged by the operator, Mitesh recounted the gravity of Jessica's breathing distress. Upon confirming her inability to breathe, the operator provided reassurance of imminent assistance. The call concluded with Mitesh's desperate pleas for Jessica to regain consciousness and his request for the operator to notify his father-in-law about the unfolding tragedy. Tragically, Jessica was declared deceased at the scene, leaving Mitesh shattered. Despite their 12-year bond and seemingly idyllic life, she was abruptly snatched away from him. After swiftly securing the residence and commencing evidence collection, the police initially treated the incident as a botched burglary. Mitesh, along with Jai and other family members, willingly provided their statements to law enforcement. Surprisingly, even the family remained unsuspecting, offering solace to Mitesh just 48 hours following the tragedy during a house visit. Recalling the moment, Jessica's sister Minal recounted, "I walked straight up to him, sat down on the sofa, and went to hug him. He immediately buried his head in my shoulder. At that point, I thought he was genuinely crying." Jessica's father, Jay, remarked, "Why would somebody do this? Jessica was not the sort of person who would confront anybody. But not for one moment was I thinking Mitesh could have done this. I was comforting him. I held his hand. He let me do all that. Despite these interactions, the autopsy results disclosed that Jessica's cause of death was asphyxiation, indicating oxygen deprivation in her bloodstream. The presence of neck injuries confirmed she had been strangled. The initial suspicion arose from a potential burglary scenario indicated by the disorderly state of the house when Mitesh contacted emergency services. Nevertheless, the absence of forced entry indications prompted concerns. It became apparent that the scene of the crime had been manipulated to mimic a burglary, deflecting attention from the true perpetrator. Law enforcement promptly cordoned off the premises and initiated the gathering of evidence. CCTV footage played a critical role in outlining the sequence of events. Recorded on camera, Mitesh was seen briefly leaving the house to retrieve his laptop and purchase pizza, establishing a 40-minute time frame within which the crime might have occurred. Upon further scrutiny of the CCTV footage and digital evidence, significant disparities in Mitesh's recollection of events emerged. Investigators uncovered that Jessica had arrived home 40 minutes before Mitesh departed, suggesting that they were both in the residence together during that time frame. This contradicted Mitesh's assertion of discovering Jessica unconscious and bound upon his return. Additionally, the police gained access to data from the Apple Health app on the couple's Apple Watches. This data furnished crucial insights into their heart rates and movements at the time of the incident. Analysis revealed a sudden spike in Jessica's heart rate upon her arrival home, followed by a cessation of her pulse. These findings indicated that she had passed away while Mitesh was present in the house. Furthermore, Mitesh's Apple Health app data exhibited erratic movements within the residence following the cessation of Jessica's heart rate. These actions correlated with the staged burglary setup, implying that Mitesh was attempting to fabricate the presence of an intruder and conceal his role in the incident. The forensic examination of the crime scene revealed compelling evidence against Mitesh. His DNA was detected beneath Jessica's fingernails, indicating a physical altercation, and on the plastic bag utilized to asphyxiate her. While he tried to justify the presence of his DNA by stating that he touched her face to remove the tape, the sole presence of his DNA on the bag contradicted his explanation. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Mitesh had conducted internet searches related to staging a burglary and killing a spouse, dating back to 2012. This revealed a premeditated intent to commit the crime and demonstrated that Mitesh had been planning Jessica's murder for a significant period. On May 17, 2018, 4 days after the murder, an arrest was made and the suspect was taken into police custody. It was a man, a 37-year-old man. It was Jessica Patel's husband, Mitesh Patel. As the evidence unfolded, the extent of Mitesh Patel's deceit and manipulation emerged with striking clarity. The family was left in disbelief as they grappled with the revelations, further shocked during the trial as details of Mitesh's illicit relationships, his involvement with Amit, and his elaborate scheme to abscond with the embryos came to light. Reflecting on the trial, Jessica's sister Meenal expressed, "95% of what was said was a complete shock to us." While there is no indication that his partner anticipated Mitesh's violent act, unsettling text messages presented in court included one chilling message to Amit that starkly stated, "Her days are numbered." Mitesh used Jessica as a means to hide his homosexuality and conform to societal expectations within their conservative community. Growing up in a traditional household, Mitesh was aware that his sexual orientation would be unacceptable to his family and the larger community. To maintain his image, he married Jessica, projecting the illusion of a happy, heterosexual relationship. However, once they were married, his true nature emerged. Beneath the facade of a happily married 37-year-old pharmacy owner lay a deceitful, promiscuous, and abusive man who was living a lie. Throughout their marriage, Jessica unearthed Mitesh's clandestine engagements on the homosexual dating platform Grindr and directly addressed the issue. She had intercepted his conversations with other men and was cognizant of his unfaithfulness within their union. Mitesh deliberately underwent treatment to diminish his sperm count. This deliberate action aimed to reduce the likelihood of impregnating Jessica during their intimate encounters. By diminishing his sperm count, Mitesh actively sought to avert conception and pursue his hidden agenda of abstaining from parenthood with Jessica. Despite Jessica's aspirations of surmounting their challenges,
including their unsuccessful endeavors at conceiving through IVF and re-establishing stability and joy in their relationship. The exposure of Mitesh's homosexuality and intentions to relocate to Australia with another individual ultimately shattered any lingering hopes of a contented future together. Moreover, Mitesh exhibited a recurring pattern of abusive conduct towards Jessica. Various individuals, including pharmacy employees, frequently witnessed Mitesh displaying hostile outbursts aimed at Jessica, even in the presence of customers and colleagues. These episodes often left Jessica visibly distraught, as Mitesh would forcefully shut doors, hurl objects, and kick the base of the island in the dispensary. In terms of physical mistreatment, employees also noted Jessica's impaired mobility, with Jessica disclosing to them that she had sustained a bruise on her leg due to Mitesh throwing his mobile phone at her, resulting in the injury. Despite these adversities, Jessica remained steadfast in their marital relationship, potentially motivated by her affection for Mitesh and her yearning to establish a family. The trial of Mitesh Patel commenced on November 13, 2018, at Teesside Crown Court, where the prosecution put forth a case characterized by its unsettling intricacies. They unveiled that Mitesh had engaged in extramarital relationships with other men, leading a dual existence, one portraying him as a devoted spouse and esteemed pharmacist, and the other concealing his true identity as a homosexual individual plotting to embark on a fresh journey with his boyfriend in Australia. Additionally, the prosecution disclosed Mitesh's intention to utilize Jessica's cryopreserved embryos to conceive a child with his partner, Dr. Amit Patel. Mitesh had fostered a romantic bond with Dr. Amit and strategized a relocation to Australia alongside him, intending to utilize the insurance payout from Jessica's demise, valued at nearly £2 million, to finance their new chapter. The prosecution contended that Mitesh had meticulously orchestrated Jessica's murder over an extended period, delving into internet research on methods of perpetrating the act. The defense maintained Mitesh's innocence, arguing that the evidence against him was based on circumstances and lacked direct proof of his involvement in the crime. They contended that an unidentified perpetrator was responsible and that Mitesh was being falsely incriminated. Following a 3-week trial, on December 4, 2018, the jury delivered their verdict. Mitesh Patel was convicted of murdering his wife, Jessica Patel. Justice James Goss, the presiding judge, imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 30 years. During sentencing, Justice Goss remarked, "You have no remorse for your actions. Any pity you have is for yourself." He also noted, "You were an accomplished liar and continued to lie, including in your evidence to the jury." The community was stunned by the verdict, with many acquaintances of Mitesh and Jessica struggling to come to terms with the revelation of Mitesh's deceitful facade and the chilling act of violence he committed against Jessica, whom they had viewed as a harmonious couple. Jessica's family experienced profound devastation as they mourned the loss of a cherished daughter and sister. The individual they had welcomed into their family circle, believing in his trustworthiness, had shattered that trust in a profoundly shocking manner. In their statement, they expressed, "Jessica was our life. She had a bright future ahead of her. She was taken away from us in the cruelest of ways." Jessica's premature passing left an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her loved ones, acquaintances, and the wider community. Their anguish and mourning stand as a poignant tribute to the vibrant and empathetic life that was abruptly extinguished. Following this tragedy, the residents of Middlesbrough rallied together to pay homage to Jessica's legacy, extending unwavering support and unity to her mourning kin. Their resilience and solidarity amidst such adversity underscore the potency of communal empathy and fortitude. The narrative encompassing Jessica and Mitesh Patel serves as a stark reminder of the concealed perils that may lurk within relationships, underscoring the essentiality of vigilance and aid for those enduring silent struggles. May Jessica's memory kindle within us a resolve to treasure our dear ones, to seek assistance when necessary, and to advocate for a world where all can exist devoid of fear and harm.